Hello, hello. All right, guys, welcome. This is the weekly live stream that I do, and just going to get started on my slides, which I shall share on my screen. If you're watching from YouTube, you're going to see all of the slides. If you're looking in on TikTok, you're not going to see the slides, but I guess you're used to this format. So let's get started. Today is the Property Investor Roundtable. You're all most welcome. I'm going to fly through it. You're probably here as a result of hearing the podcast, I'm assuming anyway. Okay, guys, welcome. Sorry, I'm going to start again because I had my microphone on silent. So you're all most welcome to the weekly Property Investor Roundtable. And what I have got planned for you today is a bit of a cover. We're going to cover the news, various events that are taking place. And I'm also going to be doing a Q&A. So you guys that are looking in on the various platforms, you can go and leave a comment and I'll be happy to take your comment and answer your question or whatever. Quick reminder, I do this every Wednesday. I do it live. If you're listening in from Ireland or the UK, it's 1 o'clock. So you might call this a lunch and learn. If you're listening in from the US, it's 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So you might call this a breakfast briefing. I call it the Property Investor Roundtable. So let's go through some of the real estate news articles that I've picked up on in the past week. And these are pretty important because there's just so much news going on. And obviously the fact that there's a new Prime Minister in the UK, that is impacting a lot of the market. What we have at the moment is buy-to-let landlords are getting caught between the high rates and the squeezed tenants. And by that, I mean the cost of living crisis is pushing a lot of people into some difficulty. And you've got landlords are kind of stuck between it all. Landlords don't get a lot of sympathy because a lot of people kind of think they're making loads of money. But the reality is they're paying a mortgage every month and that mortgage has to be paid out of rent. And meanwhile, the tenants are getting squeezed by the fact that the cost of living has gone up. So they're not able to pay the full amount over to the landlord. Perhaps the landlord has now just gotten his rates increased. So this is all having a pretty negative impact. Also, the UK banks, because of the kind of the drama that took place in the UK market recently, we had a situation where UK banks have now withdrawn some of the mortgages for first-time buyers. The reason they've been pulling this is because the loans out there at the moment are extremely hard to predict, like where the rate's going to be going. And if you have got rates that are continuously rising, you're going to be in a situation where it won't be long before first-time buyers, who are typically the kind of guys that have just scraped in enough of a deposit to put down their deposit on a property, those guys are most susceptible to getting caught by the increasing rates. And they'll be the first people to kind of fall over. We've also got crumbling commercial property valuations, which is signaling a big slump in sales. Now that is because of interest rates, it is putting a huge amount of pressure on commercial property. Commercial property investors tend to borrow and they fix in their rates and stuff like that. And all of a sudden the fixed rate amount that you can borrow is really becoming quite difficult to fund a lot of commercial property. So it's starting to push people into difficult situation. And in the Goldman Sachs, the big financial institution, they recently predicted that they're expecting UK commercial property to fall by as much as 20%. Here in Ireland, I think we're possibly looking at 10 to 15%. That's kind of the predictions that I've heard so far. So UK bond. Now, one of the good news is regardless of your political persuasion, we have got the bonds have surged on the back of Rishi Sunak becoming the new Prime Minister in the UK. And that is good for the UK particularly, because their whole rates got into real difficulty because of the uncertainty around markets and stuff. And the market, like the international markets, were looking at the UK pound as the British pound. They were considering it like they would consider a developed country. And so this was just as unheard of. Normally people are looking at the likes of Argentina and Peru and places like that and thinking, oh yeah, the economy is kind of, but never has the UK been looked at in the same kind of light. And so the fact that Rishi has come in now has stabilized the markets, and that's going to be a good thing for Ireland as well, because Ireland was suffering from contagion. Now, I'm going to go and look at some of the local news. Like central bank here in Ireland has reduced its, it's changed, it's eased its rules. Prior to this, in order to go and borrow money from the central bank, or the central bank rules were that your mortgage could not be more than 3.5 times your annual income. That has been now pushed out to four times. And so now there's a lot of criticism about this, because the timing of this, I mean, in the last couple of years, that could have been done at any time. And instead, it's waited until now when there's a cost of living crisis and rates are starting to increase. So you're in a situation where your costs are under pressure. And on top of that, now your rates are going up. So you're now under pressure there as well. And in addition to that, now you're allowed to borrow that little bit more. So obviously your payments are going to be greater. And so people wonder, like, was this done for the buyers, or was this done for the property developers and the people that are selling the house prices? It's a good question. And if you guys have any, if you guys have got it, it's fuel on the fire. Yeah, I think you're right there. That's from Code Patcher. Nice to see you guys. So if you have any comments or any questions like that, feel free to leave them in the comment section, and I'll get on with it. So what does it mean, the loosening of these rules? Well, I mentioned that the 3.5% or 3.5x your income has become 4x your income. So that's fine. When is this going to take place? You will be able to do this from January. That's when the rules come into force. How much of a difference will it make? That's not initially clear, but on the face of it, it means that aspiring new homeowners will see a 14% jump in the amount they can borrow. So a couple with a combined earning of 85,000 could borrow 297,500 before. That will jump to 340,000. So they're going to have a significantly higher amount that they can borrow from, which is a good thing, I guess. But that's just going to be absorbed. It's not going to mean that you're going to get a better house. It's going to be absorbed because the construction costs that the builders have been struggling with have also risen about 20% just in the last 6 months alone. And so we're looking at all of that extra money that you're having to borrow for the bank is just going into the cost of additional construction. And why did they wait until now? So it says here that the bank has consistently erred on the side of caution. In particular, it has argued, and studies have supported this position, that looser lending rules would have just passed on to higher property prices. And so obviously there is different people with opinions on this. I know I saw one that Mark Paul in the Irish Times said that we should be thankful to the central bank for not doing this years ago, because we'd be in a worse situation now than we currently are. Developers win with the new lending rules. This is the kind of the general view that this is just going to mean that developers are able to sell the properties, and certainly that would be the perception. But then again, the market, there's so many forces on the market now. We are in really difficult territory at the moment. There's just so many things happening with inflation, with interest rates, with uncertainty in the market, and now they're talking about a global recession. I'm going to be going into that shortly. The global recession thing is it's going to be interesting. I've got a whole sort of load of slides that I'm going through on that, so stay tuned for that. Just as a little bit of market news, Sherry FitzGerald, who are one of the big residential agents here in Ireland, they have decided that they are now planning to enter into the commercial property sector. Now, they were in the commercial property sector before, but they pulled out back, I can't remember when it was, but after the recession, everything kind of tanked. And so I think they pulled out back then. Now, one of the things that is really starting to kind of impact the market is just the Ukrainian refugee crisis. And obviously everybody is doing their bit to help the Ukrainians that have been kind of pushed out of their country by the aggressive actions of Russia. The problem is where do you put them? Like Ukraine is a massive country with something like 40 million people. And now it's estimated that somewhere between 8 and 10 million of those people have been displaced and have moved into other countries, neighboring countries. And Ireland has obviously received quite a lot of those. The problem is that we already had a housing crisis in Ireland, and therefore we are in deep trouble now regarding where do we put all these people. It says here, the outlook set to remain challenging with 56,000 people so far fleeing to Ireland. Now, we already had a housing crisis. So imagine what it's like when you add 56,000 additional homes, the needs for homes, to a housing crisis that was already acutely on the wrong side of the supply chain. So this has had a knock-on impact, and Citywest, which is a hub that a lot of people, whenever Ukrainian refugees arrive into the country, they go straight to this hub in Citywest where they've been accommodating them on a short-term basis whilst they put them into homes in various places. Now they're unable to actually house them in this hub, and so they've actually closed it down to new arrivals. There's a shortfall, they say, of 15,000 places for refugees by December of this year. So we're in for some trouble ahead. They're now accommodating more than 58,000 people. 42,000 of them are Ukrainians, and then 16,000 are international protection applicants, whatever that means. And so what this is doing, it's putting pressure on the whole system. And so naturally the government, in order to try to help with this, what they've done is they have gone and offered payments to everybody out there. If you can house a Ukrainian in your home, you can open up one of your bedrooms or whatever, you will get paid $800 a month for doing that. And that has been increased. Actually, it was less than that, but it is now $800 a month. So the government is expected to double the payment to households to $800 a month. Previously, it was $400. And this is going to, well, it's certainly going to help take some of the pressure off, but it's going to be, yeah, thanks for that. I got that, but I'm just trying to wonder, international protection applicants, like which countries, is there like a particular country that most of these are from? I guess Russia. I mean, there's a lot of people that have left Russia in difficulty. Do I have to feed them is a question. That's a very good question. I don't think so. I think the Ukrainian refugees also receive a subsistence allowance that is paid to them. This is really just for you giving up your home. Pakistan, Syria, yeah, okay, great. In terms of other news, we got the planners. So there's a big issue going on Bord Pleanála at the moment, and the Bord Pleanála has been under fire recently for various reasons. They have just given the go-ahead for an 11-story build-to-rent scheme, and this is actually overturning a decision that had been made by Dublin City Council. So it's interesting to see that they're actually doing this. It says here, Tom, sorry, Gavin, missed the opening remarks. Are you housing any? No, I'm not in a position to do that. I have 5 kids, so my house is pretty packed most of the time. Just getting on to the next one, we have Aldi. So I mentioned this last week. Aldi actually put a newspaper ad in the paper last week, and what they did was they said that they're looking for sites. And this is something that I kind of picked up on, because there are people out there that are being paid a percentage finder's fee for bringing a kind of a site to Aldi. But really the obvious thing here is to be actually the person who owns the land. So they are looking for up to 25 sites across Dublin. And what they're looking for is sites that are large enough to house a car park. And they're looking at this very hard. They're trying to open up an awful lot more schemes at Aldi shopping centres. And the reason that they're trying to do this is because there is obviously the cost of living crisis that we're going through. People are starting to become an awful lot more careful with what they're spending money on. And because of this, they are starting to push people in to the likes of Aldi and Lidl. And so these guys are obviously trying to push very hard. Now, the only thing is what I'm hearing is that these guys do not like the idea of overpaying for a site. They have a reputation for being very frugal and all that kind of stuff. And so you are going to find that these guys do not go out and just hand over a big check to go and get a site. Something that impacts me more so because I'm more of a commercial investor is LinkedIn have announced that they are scaling back office plans in Dublin due to the shift to hybrid working. Now, this is interesting because they have signed a lease on big office, and their European headquarters is at Wilton Park. And back in 2020, they had signed a long-term lease for 40,000 square meters. Now, that is a huge office, and that's over 440,000 square feet. And so you're expecting to house probably 4,000 people in something like that. And so it is, it's pretty big. At the time, their workforce was 1,200, and they're increasing that by more than 4,000 workers. But the fact that people have now done this work from home sort of stuff because of the pandemic, those guys do not need to house all of them in an office any longer. And so this has made people sort of very, very wary and questioning what's going to happen to the office sector. And they are not expected and not expecting any jobs to be in danger at LinkedIn as a result of scaling back. The company is still in recruitment mode, and they are currently employ more than 2,000 people. So interesting. Now, this decision by LinkedIn has not just impacted the property market. It's actually it's having an impact on a lot more stuff. So there's various companies that have started to feel the pain because of this, and the big developers are the first ones because the decisions to go and move into their buildings have been stopped. Work from home should be illegal. Yeah, I feel the same. Google, for example, is bringing its staff back into the office a few days a week, and I'm actually seeing that because they are here in East Point. And anyway, let's get on to the next one. Singapore. One of the interesting things is Singapore. One of the big investors, it's called Mapletree, and they acquired this big Docklands scheme, this big office building that was under construction at the time, and TikTok moved into it. Now it's a massive, massive building. It's 202,000 square feet. Those of you who know Dublin will know the building that TikTok has moved into. It's right next to Facebook, ironically, and it is just around the corner from the Ferryman pub. And this is a huge scheme. They went and they signed a lease for the entire building. They're paying the price of the building itself is 320 million, and so it's a serious deal. And this Singapore investor is now weighing up whether to sell the property. And it's interesting to see that they're thinking to do that. Now, meanwhile, there's various other buildings that are out there. You've got Facebook have moved into a place called Fibonacci Square, which is formerly AIB's headquarters. And Fortress is in talks with the family of Zara about the potential sale of that to them. So this is all interesting. So what else? Oh yes, something that just sort of popped up in the newspapers here is the Ireland's first zero emissions distillery has opened up in Galway. And this is something that I'm seeing much more in the commercial sector. We are all aware that residential property, you can now go and buy A-rated homes. And certainly there's an awful lot of people that are starting to look at A-rated homes because of the cost of energy and all of this kind of stuff. So because energy costs are so high, people are now saying we've got to go and find ourselves one of these houses that is A-rated so that we're not paying as much. Now, I can vouch for these houses, like literally you don't need to turn on the heat. Whereas if you buy an older kind of 1980s or 90s style house, those houses have such bad insulation that you nearly need to have the heat on during the summertime. So, but so there's a big push now towards zero emissions, and not just for the fuel efficiency and stuff, but also for obviously the climate action and the fact that this can make climate change something. It'll certainly help in terms of climate change. And one of the problems with that is that there's a huge amount of buildings out there that are, beautiful old heritage buildings that go back to the kind of turn of the century or even later. Like if you look at houses in Fitzwilliam Square and the Edwardian squares and the Georgian squares, if if you look at all of those are beautiful old houses and they're heritage properties that should be protected, but they have absolutely atrocious energy ratings, and they're actually excluded from the building energy rating scheme. So the certificates that you get for most houses and buildings is a BER certificate. In the UK, I think it's called the Energy Savings Cert or something like that. I can't remember the exact name, but these certs are issued based on the efficiency of the building. And if you have a really, really like top-notch efficient building, you're going to find that you can get stronger rents, stronger sales, all that kind of stuff, because the people that are living there obviously are saving on they have the benefit of the savings over so many years. And I know, give you an example. I was running a building a couple of years ago and we had all of these old light fittings in the ceiling. And the light fitting, the monthly bill the monthly bill was about 4,000 a month we were paying for these light fittings for the electricity in the building. And when we went and we changed all the light bulbs, every single one of them we replaced with LED light bulbs. And it went from 4,000 a month down to 2,000 a month. So our energy bill fell. So take that over a 12-month period, that's a saving of about 20,000. And what actually happened though, in order to pay for the installation of all of these bulbs and everything, only cost us about 10 grand. So within less than 6 months, this had fully funded itself. So it was a very, very worthwhile exercise. And so you can see why a lot of people are starting to look at this. Just the savings are massively outweigh the cost and stuff. Now, one of the problems with these old heritage buildings is you cannot do that. When you go and look at a heritage building, you're in a situation where a lot of the time they're actually protected. You can't do anything with the facade. You can't pull down plaster. You can't kind of put up additional insulation. You can't do any of that stuff. So there's a building currently for sale on Westmoreland Street. I see it in the paper today, and it's a landmark building. It's right next to the Westin Hotel, for those of you who know Dublin, and it's looking out on Trinity College. So it is absolutely central, and it's a beautiful building. It used to be an AIB bank branch, but they have since closed down. And so the building has got planning for restaurant use. And that is about the only thing that I can think of that would work in a place like that, because it is a very, it's going to be a nice place to go and eat a meal from a restaurant standpoint. But in terms of a kind of an office environment or anything like that, it's not going to work, because most people nowadays, when they're looking at an office building, they want it to be efficient for energy. They wanted to tick all these boxes around sustainability. And a building like this just is not going to do that. And it's going to be interesting to see who is going to buy a building like this, because the kind of big investors that would buy something like this are like big funds and things. They've got all of these rules around the amount of sustainability, emissions, all of that. They're trying to reduce all of that sort of stuff. And so buying a building like this is just off their, they're just not going to choose it, because if you choose that building, you're going to be damaging your efforts on the other side of the house, which is, sustainability, corporate social responsibility, all this kind of stuff. So I can see it as a real problem. And some of these old buildings, these old heritage buildings that are beautiful and people should, try to preserve them, they are actually going to be in this kind of no man's area where nobody wants to buy these things because they're such a headache in terms of heating and cost and all that. And then just finally, in terms of the news and stuff like that, they keep on talking about this levy, this concrete levy. Now the levy is, so mica is this problem that we have in the concrete. There was during the last boom, there was a whole lot of cement sold that had mica in it. Now mica is like a sand-like substance that's in, and it actually does not allow the cement to bond. And so it's starting to kind of crumble and break up and stuff. And something like 150,000 housing units and buildings have been impacted by this problem. And so hundreds of people, like tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people are impacted. And it's like through no fault of their own. So in order to try to fund the cost of repairing 150,000 houses, what they're talking about is levying the construction sector. And they were saying that they were going to add 10% to the cost of every construction project. The problem with that is the construction industry is currently going through this massive, massive problem with inflation and cost costs rising. And we've seen in this industry in the last 6 months, maybe a 20% increase in costs. And if you're looking at a 20% increase in costs, then like, how would you feel about somebody saying, well, you also now have to have an additional 10% on top of that to help fund this mica levy? And so what it's going to eventually do is it's just going to end up going on top of the price of a house. And so the average person that's out there buying a home is looking at, it says here, about €1,200 per house of an additional payment. And that's likely to go to 3,000 or 4,000 because at the moment they cut it to 5%, but they were talking about 10%. So I'm going to talk to you about threats versus risks, okay? And this is interesting because I'm in the process, I'm actually reading this new book that's come out, and it's by this academic guy, and he's really very, very smart person. His name is Nouriel Roubini, and Megathreats is the name of the book. But what's really interesting about this particular guy is he predicted the 2008 crash, and his nickname by the papers and stuff is Dr. Doom. And he's currently predicting a much, much worse economic crash today than in 2008. And so I kind of thought you guys might like to hear a little bit more about this. So risks are things that we need to be aware of at all times when you're an investor. But threats are basically like risks on steroids. And there's an awful lot of threats out there at the moment, much, much more than we ever had to deal with before. So let me just list off some of the threats. There's geopolitical threats. And the most obvious one is Russia. And the fact that Russia is currently at war with Ukraine and that NATO and the West are supporting Ukraine, there is a very big threat and a big risk that Ukraine and Russia, that conflict will expand into neighboring countries and that NATO will get involved. And if you have Russia versus NATO, you're into really, really big nuclear threats. And so we have to be very, very wary of the threats there. China is also becoming a little bit of a problem for the West because they are looking at Taiwan and they're looking at potentially taking it back. And they're saying that they're going to take it back. And at the same time, the West is saying that we will defend Taiwan and stuff. So that is another major political risk. And beyond that, you've got North Korea firing missiles, and they've now developed nuclear warheads by all accounts. You've got Iran that is trying to do the same. So Iran, North Korea, Russia, China, like it's a scary world out there at the moment. Now you've also got environmental risk. And environmental risk, we all know that climate change represents a massive, massive climate risk. And at the moment, it's so obvious that this is a major problem coming down because we've got record amounts of rainfall. You saw what happened in China where the subway filled up so fast, so quickly that the people on the train ended up neck high in water. And you have the villages in Germany and Bavaria and stuff like that got basically washed away. And like the entire town was devastated. I've seen floods in London, and there's been floods in Australia. And now in Australia, it was particular. It's something they're saying it's a once in 10,000 year event. And yet it happened twice in the same year. And this once in 10,000 year event, it resulted in the river levels rising by, I think the amount was 6 meters, okay? So that was basically 2 floors of a house. The water rose above that level. And it's terrible, but it happens. But the problem is it's happening with greater and greater frequency. And that is one of the issues that we have with climate risk. And in addition to that, then you've got the up in the North Pole and in Greenland, you've got the ice caps melting at a rapid rate. Last winter in Greenland, they recorded the first time that the highest temperature in 50 years, and it was something like, not in 50 years, the highest temperature in history, but it was more than 50 degrees above the average normal temperature, 50 degrees higher than normal. So this is absolutely phenomenal temperature. And you've got temperature extremes across all the countries in the world this year, higher than ever before. forest fires higher than, larger than ever before. Everything is starting to kind of fall apart because of, you're depressed now. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. Am I the new Duncan Stewart? He was actually my lecturer back in college. Anyway, health risks, COVID pandemic, Ebola in Africa, like these are all, there's obviously health risks out there, technological risks out there. You've got artificial intelligence, machine learning, robotics, and automation. The threats and the risks are that you're going to be, your job could be replaced by automation or by robotics or by AI or whatever, or certainly the average job. Like they're talking about the trucking industry, which employs something like 40,000 people in Europe alone. I think it is that, with driverless cars and with driverless trucks and things like that, you're going to be in a situation where those trucks and those taxis and all that, they will just be driverless. And so you're going to have a huge amount of people that are actually going to be out of work because of that. And that could actually, if it's at scale, if you're talking about thousands of people all losing their job due to technological changes, and the people that develop these technology companies are becoming billionaires, you can see how that would actually have a long-term threat to political sort of peace and things like that. You can actually see how people will be marching the fact that, there's the imbalances. You've got people losing their jobs en masse, and then you've got somebody who's created the technology that did this becoming a billionaire themselves. There's also a backlash against globalization, and it's now that is currently being reversed at the moment. And there's all of the the profits that we saw during the 2000s and everything that were being made by big corporations, they were being done because they were saying, let's move jobs out of Europe and out of America, and let's put them in China, and let's go and get all. China has become the factory of the world, where everyone sends their phones to be manufactured there and all that kind of stuff. Now, that after the pandemic and the fact that they are still dealing with the zero COVID policy in China, there's an awful lot of people saying we need to go and take this stuff back home. And what that's going to do is going to actually reduce profits, but it's going to be reducing profits in order to have a situation that is maybe a little bit more predictable. And also, there's this concern about technology sharing between the West and China. And there's anything that has any potential for national defense is going to be protected by America, and it won't be shared with China, and vice versa. So you're going to have these kind of tensions between China and the West over that. And you've also got then the obvious political risk. And I don't know if you guys noticed it, but the difference between left and right, the extremes on both, are really starting to become obvious in America. If you look at American politics, the amount of polarization. You've got guys on one side just absolutely refusing to even consider what the other side talks about as being legitimate. And you've got Trump, you've got Bolsonaro in Brazil, you've got Putin obviously in Russia, you've got Erdogan in Turkey, like all of these. And now in Italy, you have this new extreme right politician who's just gone in. So you combine all these threats and risks together, and we're in kind of sort of a territory that nobody has known. So what your man, this guy Nouriel Roubini that I'm talking about, his book is called Megathreats, and he is predicting a major economic crash, and he's calling it a stagflationary debt crisis. So back in 2008, we had a debt crisis, but it was during a time with very, very low inflation. Now we're in a situation where we have very high inflation, debt crisis in the middle of that. And the problem is that you're going to have fiscal, monetary, and economic issues all pushing against one another. So normally what fiscal is tax, okay? So normally if the government wants to kind of reduce activity, they can increase tax. If a central bank wants to increase or reduce activity, they increase rates. And then what you can do is you can kind of stimulate the economy, or you can kind of bring it back down based on those things. Now we're heading into a big economic crash based on all of this debt. And at the same time, you've got inflation. And the two of those running side by side is very, very difficult, because what you have is normally when inflation is running hot, the monetary rates will be reduced or will be increased, and that will actually reduce demand, and it'll mean that the inflation goes back down. And then you do it quickly enough, that the economy doesn't crash in the process. The problem is that it's rising too quickly now. And so they're going to have to go and quickly increase rates. And when they do that, they're going to stimulate a recession. And it's not going to be a short, like 2 quarters of recession. It's going to be a very, very long recession. And so it's going to be very sharp by all accounts. Central banks are struggling with this at the moment. And it's going to be difficult. The global debt at the moment, if you take all of the developed countries and the undeveloped countries, it's currently averaging around 350% of gross domestic product. Back in 2000, the average was 200%. So you're looking at nearly 4x the amount. And so we've got a much, much bigger problem now. This ratio is higher than it was during the Great Depression, and it's higher than it was after World War II. So we're in really uncharted territory, and this is interesting. A lot of companies, and in fact, a lot of countries are going to go bankrupt. A lot of banks, yes, exactly. And we've already seen this. In Lebanon, we've seen, obviously, they've gone bankrupt. Sri Lanka has gone bankrupt. And now we're looking at Turkey and Argentina. If you look at Turkey at the moment, inflation in Turkey is running at 83%. So that's going to be the next country that kind of gets into very serious difficulty. In Argentina at the moment, their inflation is so high that their central bank have had to increase borrowing rates to try to kind of bring it down. What does it cost to get a mortgage in Argentina today? 75% interest on your home loan. And so obviously, if you want to go and put some money in the Argentinian banks, you're going to earn 75% on your money, but there's a good chance that the money will not be paid to you because they may not be able to. Now, Greece got bailed out during the crisis, the Eurozone crisis, and Italy and Spain are both looking very, very shaky at the moment because they have a huge amount of public debt, and they're much, much larger economies than Greece ever was. And as was the case back with Greece, the problem you had is that countries that were fiscally responsible, like the Netherlands and Germany, they were there saying, why should we go and bail out these guys? These guys are being kind of lying on the beach, borrowing money, and therefore they don't deserve unless they suffer real pain. So this kind of creates this tension between the different nations. Slow moving versus fast moving threats. So one of the big problems that we have is that there's stuff going in. Gold and silver, absolutely. I'm going to come to that now. Some of the things that you can do to seek refuge in this problem, and it's an interesting point to make. But just to finish the point, fast versus slow moving. These threats, they're moving at different speeds. The worst one is climate change, but it's moving slowly. And so no one is going to react. Whereas obviously, if somebody invades your country, that's a fast moving threat. You've got to immediately respond to that. The problem is that the slow moving threats, they're more significant, but they don't look as urgent. And so they tend to be put on the long finger. And so something like climate change is not being looked at really seriously. Because if it was, people would really sort of stop producing emissions and things like that. Domestic political constraints, okay? It doesn't really matter what you want, what is the right thing to do. If you can't get political support around that, then you're going to get yourself thrown out of government. And so politicians are dreadful in this regard because all they do is go after the local, the things that'll get them to keep their jobs. So you go and ask a politician, what does he believe on a certain topic? And the likelihood is if he's going to lose his job over this kind of unpopular decision, he won't admit to it. Now, the problem is you've got those domestic political constraints. You've also got international political constraints. And you have this issue where, let's say, for example, here in Ireland and in the UK, we're all taking climate change very, very seriously. And we decide, let's go and cut our emissions. Everybody's to go out and move into an A-rated house. And everyone is to go and do the right thing, put your bins, sort out your rubbish, drive electric cars, do all this. So we go and we take a huge amount of cost and effort to do all of these things. Meanwhile, China and India don't lift a finger. And because they don't lift a finger, the climate change is going to continue to go up. So why would we take the pain if these other countries are not doing it? And so therefore, we're going to take the pain and we're going to still get impacted. And that is the problem with this kind of free rider problem. And so it's very, very difficult. Now, you can actually understand from China and India's point of view, because they are now emerging as the powers that they are. And these powers are only now starting to kind of enjoy the increased benefits and all of that kind of stuff that America and the UK and all of the kind of developing world that we all enjoyed over the last 200 years, like the Industrial Revolution. That's when the UK experienced this kind of rise in living standards and stuff. So with all of the problems in the climate now are the result of the last 100, maybe 50, 100, 200 years of industrial nations kind of expanding. And now all of a sudden that we have a problem, we're turning around and we're saying to the countries that are rising, we're saying to China and India and places in Africa, and say, oh, you guys, you should really, cut your emissions. But it was the West and America and the UK and all these other countries that actually created the problem. So you can see why this is extremely difficult and politically nearly impossible to go and fight. And so we have to do our best, but it's going to be difficult. Just to finish out this seeking refuge, like where do you go? I think the dollar is currently very, very strong, and it's eventually going to fall in value. But you don't know when that's going to happen. So gold and silver, precious metals, those are the places that I think the price of those is going to increase. And in particular, one of the reasons why that is going to happen is because of this issue that Russia had billions. I think they had 600 billion sitting in currency reserves in Switzerland. And when that actually happened, when they invaded Ukraine, that money got frozen. And when that money got frozen, you're into a situation that they lost access to it. So Russia is not going to take that risk again, having their money in foreign currencies. So what they're probably going to do is look at precious metals and stuff. China is in the same boat. If they decide to do anything with Taiwan, they might face the same Western sanctions. And so they're probably going to be looking at the same route. And so this might be something as well. The world needs to go all out with nuclear energy. Yeah, fusion actually would be even better than nuclear energy. Now, fusion is the answer because it doesn't have the after effects and stuff like that. The problem is the technology is not yet there. So we're looking at probably another 10 to 20 years until fusion actually gets to the point where it's a stable source. But when that does happen, we'll actually be in a situation where all emissions end and the cost of energy and fossil fuels and all that kind of stuff will just come to an end. One of the other areas that you can seek refuge is, and this was from your man, Nouriel Roubini. His recommendation was environmentally resilient real estate. And obviously, me being a real estate investor, I was very pleased to hear that. Just in terms of the local Irish economy. So Rishi Sunak is the UK Prime Minister now, and that has stabilized the markets. And why am I mentioning it in an Irish property context? I'm mentioning it because Ireland was suffering from UK contagion. The uncertainty in the UK market was actually impacting the Irish market, property market, particularly the commercial market. So that is something. Prime yields are currently 4%. They are going to shrink to 4.5%. And that is, it might sound counterintuitive if you're not familiar with the way yields and all that kind of stuff works, but to go from 4 to 4.5% is actually a big fall in value. They're anticipating 10 to 15% falls in property values. That is a big fall, and that's going to impact a lot of people because there's going to be people that put so much into the property of a deposit, and that potentially is the loss of your deposit. And so you want to make sure that you've got a pretty strong bank loan and that you don't have a situation where the bank are going to say that you're now in technical default because the value of the property has fallen below a certain amount. The unfortunate estimate here, or the prediction, is that this 10 to 15% fall in value is not going to bounce back. There is a view that because of the way rates are going with inflation and everything like that this loss of 10 to 15% is lost for good. There's not going to be a bounce back unless maybe a decade from now, but you're not going to be looking at an immediate bounce back. And what you will have is an improvement in liquidity, perhaps. When is this all going to happen? Well, there's various, it's crystal ball gazing kind of stuff, but there is a view that peak pain could be by the Q2 of next year. So it'll be interesting to see. There is currently a contest between real estate and the bond market. And real estate has been valued, it has been in an advantageous position because bond yields were so low. And now that inflation has come back into the market, bond yields are starting to increase, and all of a sudden bonds are favored by the big, massive investors, the institutions, because real estate is not liquid. If you want to go, if you have 100 million investment in real estate and you want to sell that property, it's going to take you months to offload that property. If you've got 100 million in bonds, you push a button and the bonds are sold. That's how quickly you can do it. So that is the liquidity. That's the difference. And that is what everyone is seeking at the moment. And will this transfer to residential assets? That is the big question. I think a certain amount of it is going to, but then the residential market is slightly protected by the fact that you've got the supply-demand imbalances. You've got like so little supply, so much demand. You can't fix that problem. But the affordability problem is there. You've got interest rates increasing. You've got the cost of housing, construction and all that increasing. You've got the cost of living increasing. So the amount of available money in your paycheck that's available to be able to put into, for example, mortgage or rent or whatever, that is starting to come under a lot of pressure. Anyone who's filling up their car these days will know how much more they're putting in today than they were 6 months ago, last year. Your grocery bill, a lot more. Fuel, heating your home, an awful lot more. And so all of that stuff is having an impact on affordability. So that's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed this talk today. If you're interested, I do have a mastermind coaching kind of group. If you're interested, reach out to me, send me a DM in TikTok here, and I'll be happy to send you details. It's a 6-month program. It's weekly coaching with me. And I teach everything you need to know about the property market. So get in touch if you're interested. I will see you guys. I normally do a Q&A, but I'm actually rushing off to a meeting now. So I'm going to let you go, and I'll see you same time next week. See you guys.